Morning, everyone. So we are in our series called Returning to Basics, and if you've been with us, you know we're reading the New Testament together. So as always, in the back of your program there, you should have next week's reading for each day, and if you have the church app downloaded, we'll get the reminders every Tuesday and Thursday of what the text is for that week for you to be reading. So you have all that. Today, what we're going to do is last week you should have read through 1 Corinthians and started into 2 Corinthians, so you should have completed 1 Corinthians. And what we're going to do is just kind of go through that book, 1 Corinthians, highlight some things out of it. So let me start with a little background on the book of 1 Corinthians. So you have the background before we get into it. The 1 Corinthians book was written by Paul to the people that lived in a town called Corinth. So it's called Corinthians because people that lived in Corinth were called Corinthian. Same way if we live in Tulsa, we call you what? Tulsans. Or if you're a Detroiter, I grew up in Detroit, but people call me a Detroiter. These people grow up in Corinth, they're called Corinthians, okay? So he writes a letter to them. The city of Corinth was actually a major port city and economic center of the Roman Empire. And so they had a ton of people traveling through this town. It was a fairly large town. It had several Greek and Roman temples in it, in the cities that were dedicated to different gods of their religions. And what happens is Paul spends about a year and a half in Corinth, witnessing to people, leading people to Jesus Christ, and then he starts a church. He's there with them for about a year and a half, like I said, and then he leaves to go to new towns because he's a church planter. He then leaves to go plant other churches in other towns, and he leaves. And what happens after he leaves is he starts, remember there's no texting and there's no internet back then, all right? Once he leaves, he starts getting letters from people in the church writing him going, Paul, this is going on in the church, what do we do? Paul, this is going on in the church, what we do? And they're getting delivered to him, and he's starting to see issues in this church of Corinth that he had started. So he's getting constant letters from them. So what you will see is Paul sends a letter back, and we'll see also in the text, he sends multiple letters back. We just have two of them, all right? But he sends letters back, and what you will see in 1 Corinthians is he kind of has a pattern that he has when he writes here, which is he defines very clearly, here's the problem that I heard about, okay? Then he points them to the gospel, and what I mean by the gospel is he points them back to the teachings of Jesus and the life that Jesus led, his example, points them back to that, to the ideal, and goes, this is the ideal. Then he lets them know, and you guys are not living according to the gospel, according to the ideal of God. You're not living out that way. Let me give you some course correction. Then he tries to do some course correction for the church. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to highlight 5 major themes in 1 Corinthians that topics that he addresses. We're going to focus most of our time on one of them because I think it's the most relevant of the 5 to us today. Before I get there, real quick, I was letting someone else know this. I know I talk quick up here sometimes, so some of you struggle with my following of it. On your church app, if you ever go to church or the sermon notes, you have my full text I'm using here, actually on your phone right there, and you can scroll them as I'm going, or you can look at them afterwards and be like, I didn't catch that, and you can see my full notes. You also get what's on the front of your programs, okay? So that's all there. So here are the 5 issues he addresses. So 4 of them I'm just going to briefly cover with you. In chapters 1 through 4, he deals with divisions in the church. And so what you had was, in the Corinth church after Paul leaves, you start having people saying they're following different leaders. So they're like, I follow Paul, and some people are like, our leader's Apollos, and some people are like, my leader is Jerry, and my leader is Evan. And you have these people kind of going like, these are my leaders, and it's causing division in the church because they're like, well, you're not my leader, he's my leader. And so Paul's kind of way getting them back on the right track is going, guys, you're not following any people. You're following one person, his name is Jesus. So stop saying these people are your leaders because Jesus is your only leader and he's our leader. So focus on Jesus and it would solve these problems of division that you have, okay? In chapters 8 through 10, he deals with issues of eating temple meat. What that was real quick when you read this week, you had all these pagan temples, the Greek gods and the Roman gods all throughout the city, and they would do sacrifices all the time, and then in the backside of the temples, they would sell the meat at discounted prices because they had so much meat. And so you had Christians who were buying meat that was sacrificed to like demons and stuff and foreign gods, and they were buying it because instead of paying like you do in the store right now, like $5 a pound for hamburger, you could get it cooked already for you in the back lot, and you could get it for like 80 cents on the pound, okay? And so you had Christians doing that, and then you had Christians who were new going, you're eating meat sacrificed to pagan gods and stuff. What are you doing? Like, are we supposed to worship those gods too? And so what Paul lets them know is, hey, you got to be careful what you're doing and your actions and how people in the church will read it and how it might affect their faith. And he's like, so you just got to be careful. You got to be wise. Those of you that know they're foreign gods and they don't exist and you're getting cheap meat, good for you. But if it's hurting these people's faith over here, stop doing it. Okay? So be wise in what you're doing. Chapters 11 through 14 talks about chaos and worship. And so in the early Corinth church, you start having the spiritual gifts. If you've ever been to what would be known as more of like a Pentecostal church, depending on which one you've gone to, you can go to some and they have people like running up and down the aisles during worship. There's people speaking in tongues and all sorts of stuff going on. And this was happening in the Corinth church, and Paul basically tells them, cut it out. Like, you need to have order, because people are going to show up and think you're a bunch of nuts, and they're going to go away. So you need to have order, and then he outlines, here's the order of how these things should happen in your church service, so it looks orderly instead of this chaotic mess you have going on. And then in chapters 15 and 16, you have some in the church that are denying the resurrection happened. And so you have Paul addressing them and kind of going, hey guys, the resurrection is the thing that proves Jesus Christ is who he claims to be, which is God in the flesh. And if he rise from the dead, your faith is totally worthless. So you might as well just pack your bags and stop calling yourself Christians and go back to your old life. Because if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, you're still dead in your sins. And so if you're denying the resurrection, you're denying your faith, and it's worthless to you. And that's kind of like what he clears up with them. Now, the last issue, the other one we're going to deal with, Paul deals with here, I think it's probably the most relatable to us in our current culture and the current world we live in, which is the issue of sex. Okay? At this time that Paul writes this letter, he is talking to people who are born and raised in the Roman Empire and in their culture. This culture had totally corrupted sexuality in their minds, as almost all cultures do over time. Okay? Such things that were happening there was this: sex was public in the Roman Empire. You could go certain places and it was out in the front, out and open. You could see it. Sex was used as an act of worship to some of the gods. So you had different temples that you would go and you would sleep with prostitutes in those temples, and that was your act of worship to those gods. Okay? You had sex as a form of dominance over others. So you could have sex with your slaves, you could rape your slaves and stuff like that to get dominance over them. When the Romans went in and conquered areas, it was kind of acceptable that the soldiers could go rape anyone they wanted to assert their dominance over those people they had conquered. This is kind of what their mentality was. They were having sex with prostitutes, male and female. This was common. Homosexual sex was normalized. Sex outside of marriage was normalized. And the sexualization of teens was normalized. Okay? This is the culture the Corinth church is growing up. There's a reason when you watch any show on TV that is set in the Roman Empire, there's always a very strong presence of sexual elements in that show. Right? If you've ever seen anything Roman content, there's always sexuality, nudity, stuff like that, because that defined their culture. It was just so much in their culture all the time. Now, here's the thing. Due to the internet, we are currently living in a society and a culture that has just as much sexual corruption and sinfulness around it as the Corinth church did. Because on the internet now, people see everything of anything that could be happening, and you have access to it. And especially our younger generations are being exposed to it at younger ages, where they're seeing stuff that some of you in the older generation would blow your minds, and you'd be like, I can't even comprehend that. All right? But due to the internet, we have very much the same mindset and the same influences coming into us as the people of Rome did in that culture back then. So I think that's why this is very relevant to us. So due to all that, the Corinth church is really struggling with sexual perversion and the sin of sex in their church. And this is understandable because they're constantly surrounded by it, and they're new Christians and they're coming to this new faith, and so it has a huge impact on them. So for example, when you were reading 1 Corinthians, in chapter 5, you find there's a guy sleeping with his mother-in-law. Okay, let me restate this. A guy sleeping with his mother-in-law, and the church praises it. And the church is happy about it. And the church is something that they promote, that we accept this guy who's sleeping with his mother-in-law, and look how gracious we are because we're accepting of him, and we allow this to go on, and we actually celebrate it. Okay? That was one of the sexual sins happening in church. In chapter 6, we find out that some of the guys and probably even some of the ladies in a church were still going and visiting prostitutes, and this was okay with everyone in the church because it was normal behavior in their society at the time, because that's how you worship these gods, is you would go sleep with the temple prostitutes. And so you have people in the Corinth church still going and visiting prostitutes, and the church is like, yeah, we're good with that because God's grace covers us, so therefore you can do what you want with your body because God's grace forgives you and you're covered by it. And we're showing everyone how forgiving we are because we just praise this stuff and go, that's all cool. Okay? And so these reports are coming to Paul. Paul's hearing of these things, and so Paul goes, what do I do? And so what Paul does is he addresses this rampant sexual sin within this Corinth church, and he kind of gives 4 recommendations of how to deal with it. And that's the 4 I want to share with you this morning, as we all live in a culture that is totally corrupted sexually as well, of how we view it and how we interact with it and how we see it and what we think of it. And so here's what Paul's going to do. He's going to give us 4 things. I'm going to line those out for you. First thing is this. He tells the Corinth church not to deceive themselves about sexual sin. The first thing he's going to let them know is, guys, you have a false view of sexuality. Like, you're deceiving yourselves thinking all this corruption, all this perversion and stuff that you've brought into the bedroom and all that it's all good and it's all fine and it's all normal because of the society you grew up in. And he's going to let them know, no, it's not, and stop deceiving yourselves thinking this is normal. This is not normal, okay? And he says it like this in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 13. He says, but you can't say that our bodies are made for sexual immorality. That's how he starts it off. Because what they were saying is, this is how I feel. Like, God made me feel this way, and I indulge in it. So I go sleep with my prostitutes. I go do this. I go do that. I go do all these things because that's just how I feel, and I'm good with it. And he's like, you can't sit there and say God made you to practice sexual immorality. He says they were made for who? The Lord. Your body, your life. It was made for the Lord, and the Lord cares about your bodies. He cares about what you do with your body. And he's going, you were made for a different purpose, not just to indulge in whatever society was telling you to indulge in. You were made to relate to God and worship him and honor him with your life. So don't sit there and make a bunch of excuses for why you're doing what you're doing and you're involved in the things you're involved in. So that's the first thing he addresses. Now, this concept of sexual immorality I have to clear up because, again, this gets warped in our culture today. So let me explain to you, when you see the word sexual immorality in the New Testament and even Old Testament, a few times it's there, but it's stated a lot in the New Testament. It's stated from Genesis chapter 2 all the way through Jesus. Jesus speaks about it, and then it's even spoken by all the writers of the New Testament after the Gospels, is a concept of sexual immorality, and it's simply this. It's sexual activity outside of how God intended it, which was between a husband and a wife. Okay? When you see the word sexual immorality, it's outside of God's design, and his design from the very beginning was between a husband and a wife. So that's what he first throws out. And then he lets them know you can't say other ways of seeing sex are good and how you were meant to do it or whatever. He's going, no. God cares about your body. You're here to honor God. Don't practice sexual immorality. Now, what happens in the church today is we like to pick out what that sexual immorality is, and we like to hone on one of them and be like, bad person, but your sexual immorality, that's good, that's okay. That's not what Paul gives us the realm to do, okay? Sexual immorality is any sex outside of a husband-wife relationship. That means if you're sleeping with someone before you're married, that's sexual immorality, okay? Wrong. I know in our culture today, it's fine, it's good, everybody does it, it's just how we do. It doesn't make it right still. It's still wrong in God's eyes because you were designed differently, okay? Then you can get into homosexuality. You can get into adultery. You can get into all sorts of different pagan things you can think of sexuality, and going, everything outside of a husband-wife relationship is described as sexual immorality in the scriptures. So he first says, don't deceive yourselves thinking different things are okay. They're not. This is how I defined and how I created sex to be. That gets into his second advice. His second advice is this. He personally encourages a single life for those that are not consumed by sexual desire. Okay? So second thing Paul does, he's like, hey, if you can be single, man. I'm single. I encourage it. It's great. And his thing is, you can do God's work even more productively if you don't have to worry about a wife or a husband or children and a family, you have more time to focus on the kingdom of God. And Paul, being an evangelist, obviously would have this mindset, which is, I'm not tied down to anything, so I'm able to go and do God's work more productively because I don't have to give my extra energy to these things, okay? So he comes and he just says, my personal recommendation, if you're not consumed with sexual thoughts, be single, okay? Stay single. He says it like this in verses 8 and 9 of chapter 7. He says, so I say to those who aren't married and to widows, so those who have lost their partner, it's better to stay unmarried just as I am. So he's like, there's nothing wrong. And this is another thing. In churches, single people have been like stigmatized. Like, can't believe you're single. What's wrong with you? You're single. And Paul's saying, dude, be single like I am. Like, that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that. And so Paul says that. But then he adds this, which is going to lead to his third point. He says, but if they can't control themselves, they should go ahead and marry. It's better to marry than to burn with what? Lust. So he's like, you are consumed with sexual desires. I'm not telling you to stay single because you're just going to be consumed with sexual thoughts. So he's like, in that case, go get married. Like, that's fine. Which leads to the third thing. So he says it's great to be single. His third thing is he encourages people to marry and have sexual healthy activity within that marriage for those that are consumed by sexual desire. And when I keep saying this word, consumed by sexual desire, that's not a bad thing, okay? That's part of what God gifted us with. I'm married because I couldn't stay single and not be a sinner, okay, in that area of my life. I had to get married. I dated Autumn for 2.5 years, and I was like, man, we're doing a quick wedding, and we're getting out of that wedding, and we're heading off to our hotel right after the wedding. And so we had a quick wedding. We were there literally for like 25 minutes, and then we were like, see everybody, bye, okay? For this reason, even though I was an atheist up until 20, 19 and a half, 20 years old. The one thing I did right in my entire life, I didn't do anything right. The one thing I did right is I didn't have sex with anyone out of respect for my father, okay? And it's okay, Roberto. I'm going to talk about this here because it's good for this culture to hear because people need to know this can still happen. The first time I had sex was on my wedding night with Autumn. She's the only person I've ever slept with. She's the only person I've ever been with, and it was on our wedding night. It can happen. And somehow, I don't know how, God allowed me to have that happen in my life, and that's how it worked in our marriage. And so I'm like the unicorn. It actually can happen. You can do that. You can resist your sexual sin. And I say this all the time. Do you think for the 2.5 years I dated Autumn, I didn't want to? Yes, all the time. Consumed. That's why I use the word consumed. I knew I had to be married. I couldn't stay single. I need to be married, okay? So I'm married, and that's what Paul's saying is you need to be married. And he encourages, if you're consumed by it, go get married. And he says this in verse 2. He says, but because there is so much what? Sexual immorality. He's going, because you guys live in Rome, and there's so much of this baggage around you, he's like, yes, I told you to be single, but each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband. He's like, because it's everywhere around you, it's just best for you guys spiritually to go find a husband and go find a wife. Okay? It's going to do you better that way because of the culture you live in and what you've grown up around. Then he gives some insight. This is interesting. This is probably the most detailed side of this in the scriptures of a husband-wife relationship in the sexual realm. Okay? So here's what he says next in verses 3 through 5. He says this. The husband should fulfill his wife's sexual needs, and the wife should fulfill her husband's needs. The wife gives authority over her body to her husband, and her husband gives authority over to her body to his wife. Let me explain this real quick. What he's saying, and this goes all the way back to Genesis 2, the two will be united and become what? One. That when you engage in marriage with someone before God, you are bound and you're bonded and you're binded together as one individual, and your bodies are no longer your own. You are one together in God's eyes. And so he's just saying here common sense stuff, which is husbands, your body is for your wife, and wife, your body is for your husband, and you need to make sure that you guys are appropriately understanding what each other's desires are, and you're making that work in your marriage. Then he goes on in more detail, and he says this, do not deprive each other of sexual relations unless You both agree to refrain from sexual intimacy for a limited time so that you can give yourselves more completely the prayer. Okay? Then he says, afterwards, you should come together again so that Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. Okay? This is very detailed, and Paul's going, let me help you understand this. And what he's really saying is this: don't use sex as your weapon in a relationship. Don't use it as your argument point. Don't use it as your thing that you're upset, so we withhold this from each other and use this as a tool to get back at each other, because you're putting yourself in a very bad circumstance when you live in a society that's just saturated with sexuality. And he's going, don't do that. He says, only time that you do that is if you set up together, we're just not going to have this part of our marriage together for this period of time because we're doing spiritual stuff. And so we're praying, but we're going to set up a time frame for it, and then when we're done, we're going to come back together. Okay? And he's letting them know there needs to be some discussion, there needs to be some order to this. He says, afterwards, you should come together, and this line's important, so that what? Satan won't be able to tempt you because of your lack of self-control. It makes total sense. Paul's going, don't take that out of your marriage as a weapon, because the minute you take that out, you have the whole society around you throwing temptations at you. Okay? And it's going to seep into your marriage, and Satan's going to use it to attack you and destroy you. And you have to be wise about this. Now, let me throw a side note on, because just like in the Roman times, we are messed up sexually as people. And so I have to throw a side note in here real quick. As Paul's saying, don't neglect your wife and don't neglect your husband, and your bodies are each other's, and make sure you're fulfilling each other's needs. I would say this: Paul here is talking about godly sexual activity, not sex influenced by the corruption of this world. What I mean is, Christians, your wife's fulfillment to you, or husbands, your fulfillment to your wife, should not be based in what you see in the world going on in that area. Because as a minister, I've counseled with a lot of people, I've met with a lot of people, and there's a lot of stuff that causes issues in the marriage sexually. That's not because they're wanting godly sexual things happening in their marriage. They're taking things of the world and trying to pull them into their marriage. And that's causing major problems in the marriage, and at times causing abuse in the marriage and stuff like that. And that's not what Paul's calling for. Paul's not saying, hey, whatever, just give your body to them, and whatever, give your body to them. That's not what he's saying. He's saying within the confines of what godly sexual activity is. And if you had to answer, what is that? I would just simply say this: look at your bodies, how they were designed to fit together and how they were designed to work together. Talk about it as a couple, and have discussions about this, and pray about it if you need more clarification, and have a healthy sexual relationship. That's what I would tell you. Now, to be totally upfront with you, because if you watch YouTube videos, people are like, I got this product, and I have to let you know they paid for this product and stuff like that. Just so you all know, when I'm preaching this stuff, I am not perfect at this. Me and my wife are not perfect at this, okay? As all of you know, and I remind you all the time, me and my wife do not have an easy marriage, okay? We have a tough marriage because we are polar opposites on everything, okay? So we have a struggle. My point is not to get up here and tell you my marriage is wonderful and we do all this right and we have all this down and it's all perfect. My role as a minister of the gospel of Jesus Christ is to tell you what the scriptures say. And so I am here to present you with the ideal, and then we're all trying to target the ideal, not Scott's marriage, okay? That's what we're here to do. So me and my wife struggle with this just as much, and we read this stuff, and it makes us feel guilty at times, and we're like, yeah, we need to rethink things in our marriage. We probably need to rethink how we interact with each other at times, because it confronts us as much as it would any of you, okay? But that is his teaching there, which is the third thing to do. Get married and have a healthy sexual relationship in it, because it will help you from being tempted and allowing Satan to tempt you from the outside world. That gets to the last part. The last thing he says is this. He tells them to remove those who are promoting, and when I say promoting, what I mean by that is boasting or calling these things good, okay? That are promoting sexual sin or other corruptions within the church. So what Paul's going to do here is it's not even just going to stay in sexual immorality. He's going to add other parts to it too. So he says this: when I wrote you before. This implies there's another letter we don't have. Okay, it's not a letter, it's in the Bible. He wrote another letter, but he's like, I wrote you a letter, and what he's going to admit here is, I wasn't clear enough in it, and you got a misunderstanding from it. So he says, when I wrote you before, I told you not to associate with people who indulge in sexual sin. But I wasn't talking about unbelievers who indulge in sexual sin, or who are greedy, or who cheat people, or who worship idols. And then he says, you would have to leave this world to avoid people like that. So what we can imply is he got another letter, sent one back, and what they took from it was, anybody that has sin in their life, you shouldn't be associating with church. You need to get them out of your church building. Okay? And now he's writing back, he's like, last time you interpreted it wrong, let me be a little more clear about this. And what he's kind of making the point is you can't have people in the church who are taking sinful behaviors and then promoting them among you and calling them good and saying these things are good when the scriptures clearly say they're not. Okay? So he goes on to say, he says, I meant that you were not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer yet indulges, which means they willfully are just like, this is great, this is wonderful. The guy with the stepmom, this is, hey, everybody cheer it. This is good, everybody should try this, okay? Who indulges in sexual sin, or is greedy, or worships idols, or is abusive, or is a drunkard, or who cheats people. So he goes through a whole list of things here of people, and he goes, any people who are taking these things, so not just sexual immorality, but greed, that are just greedy people, just want to be rich, and that's all they care about. People who are worshiping idols, people who are abusive to other people or even their spouses, people who are drunks, and not because they're drunk, but they're coming into a church and they're offering you alcohol while you're sitting here listening to me. Okay? That would be the issue. So if Teresa's over here and I see her passing a bottle up to Christy, that's a problem in the church. Okay? If Teresa's struggling with it, that's a problem Teresa's struggling with and that we're helping with. But if she's passing a bottle to Christy and Christy's like, thank you, I've been looking for some, and they're drinking together in service, now we've got a major problem. And then Betty's over here like, hey, can you pass it to me too afterwards? These are problems in a church, and this is what Paul's trying to point out. And he's like, that can't happen. Anybody who's promoting that stuff and using it and calling it good, you need to get cut ties, get rid of. You got to cut ties for a while. Now, he will say with the guy that's sleeping with his mother-in-law, you're cutting the ties and maybe hopefully wake him up so you can bring him back to Christ and he can get his life straightened out. And he's like, so you don't cut him off and don't talk to him. You cut him off and then try to minister to him. But you can't allow him back in the church going, hey, try sleeping with your mother-in-law too. It's great. Okay? So that's what Paul's talking about here. There's a big difference, and I want you to hear this. There's a big difference between you struggling with something you know isn't right and doesn't feel right versus calling something sinful good and then promoting it as good. Those are different things. We all struggle with sins in our lives, correct? Everyone in here has sins in your life you struggle with. That is not the problem because we're all broken people. We also have sins we're dealing with. The problem becomes if you take your sin and start promoting it to other people in the church and saying it's not a sin, it's actually good, and you should be living this way too, then it's saying, hey, church, you got to get rid of that. Okay? So, for instance, I'll just give one last example. Let's say David back here, who's in the middle of the row, and he will not conform to anything in this church because he's just going to sit in the middle of the row while everybody else is in the nice, orderly rows. Thank you, David. I don't even know how you got your chair there. But now you are my example. Oh, now you even move over further. Let's say David has a gambling problem. And David has literally gambled away their entire retirement. And that's what David has done. And it's not just a thing me as a minister knows because I've talked with him and we've talked and we know he struggles with gambling and we're trying to figure out how to deal with his gambling issue. Let's say he's got the gambling issue and he comes in every week and he's talking to Jesse and Pat and Kay and he's like, you guys want to go after church and go over to the casino and gamble? I'll show you how to do it. I gamble away my entire fortune. I'll show you how to do it too. It's a great time as long as it lasts, and then you're in massive debt, and then it's horrible. But that's different scenario one, which is we're working on it, and this is something we realize is something we got to deal with at some point, and we got to work on his private life, reverse him promoting it in a church. If he's there drawing people to it, the church would say, you got to go talk to David and go, David, you can't be promoting that, and you can't be telling people this is good and trying to get them to sin. And if you do and you continue this on, this isn't the right place for you. Does this make sense to you? This is what Paul is trying to promote and what Paul is talking about. So let me close today simply with this. Sex is a gift from God. It was meant for good. It was meant to be sacred. It was meant to bind us to another human being in a way that nothing else in this world can. And it has the ability to produce the most wonderful gift we can receive from God, which is children. Okay? That was the intent. But when we distort it, when we cheapen it, when we corrupt it, when we treat it as insignificant like our society does all the time, people's lives get destroyed. So what God designed for good, once again, we see Satan take it and use it to destroy us. We, the church, the followers of Jesus Christ, are to be the guardians of a godly view of sex in a world that is daily giving us a corrupt and distorted view of it. We have to understand this, what it said in John 10:10, where Jesus says, the thief, which is Satan, the thief's purpose is to steal, kill, and destroy. Meaning Satan takes the things of God, distorts them, and then replugs them into your life to destroy you, steal you, and kill you. And he says, but my purpose, Jesus' purpose, is to give you a rich and satisfying life. The reason I tell you to do the things I tell you to do and to live the way I tell you to live is because I'm your creator. I'm the author of life. I know how I made you to get the most out of this life, and I'm trying to let you know how you can have that by following how I want you to live your life, because I'm the designer. And if you would find a rich and satisfying life. I love you. I'm trying to protect you. And to the Corinth church, Paul's going, I'm trying to get you back on the right track. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father,